This week, although you will be doing informative speeches, you may come across a situation in which you need to support your ideas. Most often the case is you will need to rewatch this lesson when it comes to persuasive speaking. But let's go ahead and study how it is that you can support your ideas. There are 3 ways to do that in a speech. First way to support your ideas is to use examples. Defined, it's a case used to illustrate or represent. And there are 3 different ways you can use examples. The most common is to use brief examples. This is where you refer to a certain case in passing. Extended examples or stories or narratives developed at some length to illustrate a certain point. And hypothetical examples. Just like with the extended examples, it's a story developed to illustrate a point, however, it's imaginary. You want to use examples to clarify your ideas, to reinforce your ideas, and to personalize your ideas. You want to put a name or a face to your topic. Be sure that when you use examples, you use vivid and richly textured words. If you don't do this, you're going to fail to personalize the idea. And of course, with all things in your speeches, practice the delivery to enhance the examples. Second way you can support your ideas is to use statistics. This is the numerical data that many people use in persuasive speaking. Here are some questions to ask yourself about statistics. Is your source credible? Is your source nonpartisan? Does your source have an agenda? So let's touch on these subjects. Are they credible? Do not use The Onion as a source to quote. Some of you may be laughing about that, but I have actually had students in the past think that The Onion is a reliable news source. So before you cite a source, check to make sure that they are legitimate. Second question, are they nonpartisan? Meaning, are they biased? My undergraduate degree is in journalism, and I can tell you without a doubt that every single news source is biased. That is how they are trained. Everyone has an agenda. It's how deep is that agenda? Let me ask you this. Republican or Democrat? Fox News. Republican or Democrat? MSNBC. Republican or Democrat? CNN. I'm sure that most of you were able to answer with the same answer for all of those news sources. Yes, they all have an agenda. Yes, they're all going to spin a story a certain way. So keep that in mind if you plan on quoting a news source or a news site in order to persuade your audience. Your better bet will be to do your own research and find your own Harvard study to back your claim versus a news site. I've had a student in the past before tell me that he got all of his information from .org sites because they don't have an agenda. Here's the difference on .org and .com. .org is for organization. It's usually a company. .com is commercial. They're usually selling something, or they're usually hitting you up with ads to sell you something. Okay? Both of them will have an agenda. I used to work at a nonprofit organization, and our website ended in .org. We had an agenda. Everyone will. It's your job to see how deep that agenda is and how biased they are. When you use statistics in your speeches, don't overload your audience with numbers. It's a lot more difficult for the human brain to process numbers than it is for it to process words, so use them sparingly. Make sure that you identify the source in which you found those numbers. Because if your facts are so good and you don't tell us where you got them, most likely your audience members will think that you made it up. Explain your statistics and tell us why it is that it's so important to know. Be sure to round off complicated numbers. So instead of telling me that a company spent $1,675,492.64, tell me they spent $1 million. See, that's a lot easier to comprehend than all those numbers thrown at you at once. Especially for your persuasive speech, you will be doing a PowerPoint, so it'll be easier for you to use visual aids to clarify your statistics. I like to throw this up here as a warning about statistics and using biased media. So the question here is, if the presidential election were held today, who would you vote for? And over half the people voting said Mitt Romney. Now, what I want you to look at is the information in yellow underneath that. And this is supposed to represent the entire country. And how many people do we have in America? Do you think the little over 1,000 adults that answered a CNN poll would actually represent the entire country? Obviously, too, hindsight, we see that that statistic is incorrect. So when you use statistics, check to see if the number polled represents the whole. Meaning, is there enough people taking place in that poll to represent the population in which they are to represent? The third and final way that you can use information to support your ideas is testimony. These will be your quotes or paraphrases that you use to support a point. There are two different types of testimonies. You have your expert testimony, which is a testimony from people who are recognized as experts in the field, or peer testimony, which is ordinary people with first-hand experience. Now, which testimony do you think is more valuable than the other? That's a trick question, because they are both equally valuable. So don't dismiss average Joe for having first-hand experience in something and think that Dr. Joe should be listened to more closely. Both add value. So if you're going to use testimonies, especially for your persuasive speech, feel free to use expert and peer testimony. And quoting versus paraphrasing. Quoting is where you use word for word. Paraphrasing is where you restate the source's ideas into your own words. But the idea still belongs to the individual in which you are paraphrasing. So make sure that in either case you give credit to that individual. Make sure too that you are quoting or paraphrasing accurately. If you remove one word and it changes the entire meaning of the quote or paraphrase, you're doing it inaccurately, and that's not right. Be sure to use quotes or paraphrasing from qualified sources. Again, do not come to class and quote an article from The Onion. And always identify the people you are quoting. That's their original thought or that's their original idea. You need to give them credit. Last thing I want to cover about supporting your ideas is citing your sources. You need to tell your audience a combination of these following items: where you found the information, who you are quoting, and what their title is, what qualifies that person to be quoted, and any number of date of the information, the statistic, and or the article in which it was found. You don't have to give us all this information every time, but you do need to tell us something so that way we know that these ideas are not originally yours. So be sure to cite them in your speech. Also, when you're doing persuasive speaking, you will do a PowerPoint. You can have a citing page as your last slide for that. But be sure to give credit where credit is due during your speech as well. That wraps up our information on supporting your ideas. Again, you can use these techniques in your informative speech. It's not expected, but you can. It is, however, expected for your persuasive speech.